All right, everyone, thank you so much for being here again with Living to Your Purpose podcast. I'm so excited. Today I have Nick Loeb. He is a producer, a director, and actor who has began his career at Universal Studios focused on M&A in corporate development and then in motion picture finance. He went on to work on his first feature film, Primary Colors, directed by Mike Nichols and starring John Travolta. Nick then began the international production company IPC, producing The Smokers in 2000 with executive producer Quincy Jones. IPC went on to partner with Barbara Streisand to produce the 5-episode award-winning documentary, The Living Century, in 2001. Since then, he has worked on several films over the last 20 years with stars like Bruce Willis and Billy Bob Thornton and Kathy Bates and Gerard Butler and Jon Voight and Tyson Beckford, Billy Zane, and Sean Astin, among many others. And today I am so excited we get to talk about his new film, Roe v Wade. Nick, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been really looking forward to this interview, and just ever since hearing about Roe v Wade coming out, this is definitely something that I wanted to focus on because this is something that I'm very passionate about. So tell us, why did you decide to make Roe v Wade?
It was interesting. So, when I was originally, pitched the idea, I was surprised that no one had really made the true story of the most famous court case in American history. I mean, Hollywood seems to make movies on everything today, but not this. There was a 1989 made-for-TV movie that really didn't get into much of it, and really didn't give the true story and all the details. And when I started learning about the case, because, I think like most Americans, everyone has heard of Roe v. Wade, but nobody really knows who's Roe, who's Wade, how did it come to be. People just know that this is the court decision that, legalized abortion in America. And so when I started reading about it, I was fascinated that it really came across as like a conspiracy movie like JFK. And for a storyteller and a filmmaker like myself, I found that to be, one, the story's never been told properly, and B, it's full of intrigue. And so I thought it would at least be entertaining to audiences. And on my personal belief side, I think it was a great way to be able to show the truth that aligns with my beliefs.
You've spent a lot of time in front of the camera, but this is actually your first debut as a director. I mean, how was that balancing acting and directing?
It was difficult. I mean, to produce, direct, and act was very, very challenging on a small budget. It was different. I mean, I truly enjoyed the experience of directing. I think that thank God I had a great partner, Kathy Lynn, who helped me out as my co-director. I feel that, and I couldn't have done it without her. And I just feel that, the reason I ended up directing the film with her is I think it was very hard. I mean, we did speak and talk and had other potential directors, but because of the amount of research that had gone into this, as the only one who could have really directed it is someone who wrote the script. And the reason is because all these characters are based on true people. This is such a volatile issue. You want to get the characters and people right. And I think it would have taken anybody, a year to get up to speed. I mean, I read 40 books based on this case, and based on not just the case, just based on the people and their lives. And I had to really understand what was in their head to be able to direct the film, which led to this.
You play Dr. Bernard Nathanson. I mean, he is a well-known abortionist who was very instrumental in Roe v. Wade, that decision. Can you tell us a little bit about him? Did you ever get to meet him?
Yeah, no, unfortunately, everybody who was portrayed in the movie has passed, with the exception of Sarah Weddington. Unfortunately, I never got to meet Bernard. I did have a chance to speak to people who knew him, read all his books, read some of his letters, watch his interviews, his documentaries. And a lot of people in I think the pro-life activist community know who he is, but even a lot of pro-lifers and conservatives and most of the country has never heard of Bernard Nathanson. And to play this guy who went through such a transformation in his life from being the abortionist, the largest abortionist in American history. I think his clinics partake in over 70,000 abortions. And to play him and to follow his journey through his conversion, it was an incredible experience. I think even more rewarding as an actor than directing, because, you know, Bernard went through, you know, excitement and happiness and fun and drama and travesty and depression and all this huge range of emotions that as an actor you bite your teeth into. And I think you either do well or you flop. And so I pray that everybody will enjoy how I portrayed Bernard, and feel the emotions that I felt, because even playing him, you know, a lot of it resembled parts of my life. And one of the reasons I wanted to play Bernard was because I also I'm not an abortionist or a doctor, but I also went through a change in my life as a conversion like he did.
Wow. Is making abortion illegal going against a woman's rights?
Well, you know, women's right to what, right? So you're asking me, is making an abortion illegal removing a woman's right to kill her unborn child? Now, I don't think, you know, in our Constitution, if you want to talk, I'm not a lawyer, but in our Constitution, in the foundations of our country, you know, these are our God-given rights. Even in our Constitution, it's our inalienable rights, which are God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so I don't think you're removing a woman's rights, but what you are removing you're removing the rights of the baby. And what happens if that baby is a woman or girl? You're removing that woman's rights. And so in our court system, what I've learned is when two rights conflict with each other, it's called a balancing of interests, right? And I think the justices even talked about that. So you have to really weigh the balancing of interests. So the balancing of the woman's right to have an abortion, or you balance the right of the baby to live. And I think if most people took a look at those two things, I would say living is a much stronger right than to be able to have an abortion. And they say, well, it's not a human and it's not a baby and it's not blah, 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 all the arguments. Okay, I mean, if the child is born, it has those rights when it's born. And so then let's go backwards, right? Are you telling me the day before it's born it doesn't have those rights? Because in a lot of states it does have those rights. So at what point is that baby doesn't have those rights? And I think that's where the argument comes down to. At what point does a human being have the same rights as another human being?
Yeah, no, I like that. Why isn't abortion considered a homicide when a pregnant woman who's murdered, that's considered a double homicide?
Well, again, I'm not a lawyer, and I think it's a great question. And I think it should be, because our law has double standards, and it's not perfect, and it continually needs to have that. I think the reasoning being, a lot of them, was because they say, well, the woman who was pregnant, who was killed, wasn't her choice to kill. It wasn't her choice. But a woman should have a choice to kill her own child and not anybody else's. I think that's where the argument is. I don't think it's a correct argument, and I think it's a hypocritical argument. And I think it's an argument that if you present a lot of people with, I think they get conflicted on it. And I think it's one of the better arguments to present to people. I think you have to take one side or another. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to either say, yes, it's a homicide. That means killing a fetus at any time is a homicide, whether the doctor does it during an abortion, it happens during a car accident, or it happens when somebody attacks you. It's the exact same as that woman deciding to kill her own baby. It's either one way or the other. And I think people, need to logically make a decision, but, people will change their point of view just to come out with the answer they want. But
Yeah,
that's our life.
it definitely seems like there's a lot of gray areas within, the issue concerning abortion. So has,
For some people, for me, there's no gray area.
yeah, but I think in
A lot
deciding,
there's gray area, and a lot of people there's gray area, but for me, it's one of the issues out there that I feel is white.
yeah, I think like in regards to like deciding whether or not who has the right to live and who doesn't, it seems like in our justice system, there's a gray area. It's either murder or, life or murder, you just.
I agree. And I don't think, and the problem is they just don't see it as a life. And I think that's what's challenging. And I think that's disingenuous.
Yes, I agree. Has taking God out of the argument helped or hurt to preserve the lives of young?
Well, and this is an interesting question. I think that if you watch the movie, as you've seen, that was the argument of one of the characters. Mm-hmm. Well, the other characters said, well, no, it is about God, and our Constitution is based on God's law. I think it actually, in our society today, I think, and I know a lot of Catholics and Christians who are going to kill me for my answer, but I think in the world that we live in today, which is so secular and so anti-religious, that I think the best pathway forward, and I agree with Mildred, who was a devout Baptist. Mildred Jefferson is the character in the movie, who was a doctor. I think you have to play the science card, and you have to take God out of the equation, because the people who are for abortion have been taking God out of the equation in the beginning, saying it has nothing to do with God. You have to look at science. And now is our time to say, great, look at the science. Because today, the science is on our side, right? You can hear a heartbeat actually, in some cases, up to 2 weeks. And so I think you have to go. Now, following science may only get you to that point, right? But it's much better than where we are right now. And so I think at this point, inserting science is crucial in this, and hearts and minds are being changed today because of science. I mean, if you look at the youth today, and although they're trending more liberal on a lot of social issues, in terms of marriage, in terms of gender identity, and they actually are turning more conservative on the life issue, and they're becoming more pro-life. And the reason they're becoming more pro-life is because they can Google it and they can see it, and that's all about science.
That was actually the first time through seeing the film that I really kind of came to know Dr. Mildred Jefferson. Wow, she is someone, just what she was willing to go through. She was basically meeting milestones that other women wasn't, as an African-American woman and being a doctor. And yet she was willing to risk it all to save the unborn and, do what she could to make a difference. I don't think a lot of people hear a lot about her, but they should.
Well, of course, I'll tell you, this is an incredible point that you make. No one's heard of Mildred Jefferson. She was the first Black woman to graduate Harvard with a medical degree.
Amazing.
If she was pro-abortion, everyone would know who she was.
Right.
She would be revered by the African-American community. She would be held up as a pedestal by Planned Parenthood, and the left. But because she fought for the right to abortion, she's essentially been obscured by history. And this is a woman that talk about breaking the glass ceiling.
Yeah.
Not only as a woman, but as an African-American woman. And really her whole life was geared towards that. She was really, truly an amazing person.
Yeah, I have so much admiration for her. And I very much feel, people will learn that she and her husband never went on to have kids, but it was kind of like she was that advocate, that mother for all the preborn children that she was very much trying to save. it's kind of like that became her mission, her kids in a way. I thought it was so neat that Alvida King was playing her mom. And then even Alvida King, like, she quoted Dr. Martin Luther King during it, which was like, wow, that's such a powerful moment. I mean, there are so many amazing, like, moments within this movie. And oh my gosh, how it was written. Wow. Like, some of I wrote down so many quotes, and I'm probably not allowed to be quoting, right?
Not a lot. I mean, if you want to give me a few, because it's not out yet and we're not writing reviews yet. But if you have one or two that are really stand out that don't give anything away, I'm happy to address them.
Okay, I liked the quote is in regards to Beethoven, and remind me of, it's played by Joey Lawrence, but the name of the attorney.
So he plays a professor named Professor Robert Byrne, who was the Fordham Law professor. He was extremely instrumental and very involved in the pro-life movement during that time. And yeah, the media was constantly after him, but he essentially tells the story of a woman who has, multiple children with different child effects, different birth effects. And the woman kept on having another child, and every kid kept on having massive birth effects. One was deaf, one was dumb, one had tuberculosis. And he poses the question, if abortion was available during that time and she had another baby, what would you do with it? And the first answer that anyone would give, well, you're not going to want to continue to have children with disability. Well, if she had aborted that last baby, we would have never had Beethoven. And that, and can you imagine, of all the aborted babies in the world, what we are potentially missing out as a contribution to this world? Maybe a baby would have been born who could have cured cancer. I mean, we don't know. And I think that that's an interesting thing. And I think also, the exponential growth of I'm going to lead me down another path here. The exponential growth of the African-American community. The African-American community, which really, especially when it comes to politics, there's a lot of fight about having control. They're a big block of voters in this country who want to have certain rights. Well, if you want to have certain rights as any group or anything geared towards you, it takes power. Powers in numbers, powers in votes. Well, the majority of babies that were aborted since Roe have been African American. So, and if you want to do this, the exponential numbers, right? So if you take 60 million and you're looking at, let's say half of those, maybe if it was 40%, considering it was only 10% of the time, but 40% of the aborted babies were African American, you're looking somewhere north of, near 30 million babies. And that doesn't include, imagine all those 30 million babies that were born over the years, and then they had babies, right? And so now the African American bloc to have power, to have what they want when it comes to the polls and votes, have been tremendously diminished by abortion. You would have more Black leaders, you would have more Black politicians, you'd have more Black people in power if you didn't have abortion. So the grave injustice today with abortion is truly against the Black community, and it stripped them of power.
And I mean, in regards to like Beethoven, that's still a hot issue right now is, should we be aborting babies who, have some type of defect based on society standards? It's still something that, a lot of countries have signed off to yes. And like, if a child has Down syndrome, yes, it's okay to abort them. And it's just, in a lot of ways, we've come a long way. In a lot of ways, we haven't. And I think it's interesting you brought up go ahead.
I can just say, on that issue, I think there's been so many times I can tell you of my friends who have had babies where they've been told that the child's going to have some sort of defect and they don't care and they have the baby anyway and the baby turns out fine. And so the genetic testing today is not reliable. It's not 100%. and there's always if and ands. And so I think it's a horrible, horrible thing that you would do that. B, you know, if you study miscarriages in women, generally, if the baby has such a problem to survive or so many defects, your body naturally aborts the baby through a miscarriage. This happens all the time. Women are like, why am I having so many miscarriages? Well, there's a chance that you'll never know. One of the main reasons of miscarriage is your body knows the baby has a defect and can't survive. And so your body does that. And so you're leaving that up to nature. A lot of you want to say God. Regardless, I think you have to leave it up to nature, and we need to stop playing God. And if you don't believe in God, you got to stop playing with nature, right? All the environmentalists want us to stop playing with nature because of global warming. Well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Stop interfering with the natural cycle of human evolution.
Yeah. You had mentioned about the Black community, and that's kind of who was targeted in regards to abortions. That's who Margaret Sanger had targeted, and yet Justice Thurgood Marshall, African American, was very influential. He decided to move forward with making, Roe v. Wade like a thing. I mean, he opted for making abortion legal, basically choosing to eradicate his own race. I mean,
yes, I think the challenge, though, you have to put your mindset, and you can't, I don't think you can criticize Thurgood Marshall, because you have to put your mindset of how life was in 1973, 1972. I'm sure he had no idea. I'm sure he had no idea the stats. The stats weren't even there yet, because it really had to become a big issue until the case. So there was not a lot of information available. And I'm sure he was completely unaware. I'm assuming if Thurgood Marshall was around today, maybe he would make a different decision and a different choice. I don't know. And so it's very hard. And that's why it's sort of cringeworthy to watch, and frustrating, I should say more, to watch the movie and be so frustrated, because we know so much more today than we knew back then. And I think people need to take their mind and say, God, we didn't know all that back then. And these guys didn't know. And I think, wow, now with all the knowledge we have now we got to hear Roe v. Wade all over again.
I think that's a really good point, is that, what we know now, they didn't know then. And, who knows if something would have been different if they would have been able to have more evidence like we have now in that courtroom before they made that decision. I'm sure it would have been a much different outcome and decision that they would have made. Okay, so the cast of Roe v. Wade, I mean, is really impressive.
Okay.
I mean, it was just amazing. It was like scene after scene of someone new coming in, and I'm like, oh my goodness, wow, like, they're in there. But I mean, it just brought so much to the film. Like, what was the casting process like?
Yeah, I mean, the majority of folks, a lot of the folks we cast out of LA, and I think we were, with the Supreme Court justices, there were so many of them that sort of just showed up in the middle of the movie. We wanted to make sure that the audience were able to follow them. And so it was really important for us to have recognizable names in those roles. But I can tell you, we were super honored and grateful for a movie like this to have so many actors that had so much experience and so much talent that have been working for 30, 40, 50 years. It was just an honor for me, regardless of just the Supreme Court guys like Corbin Bernsen or Robert Ivey or Steve Gutenberg from Police Academy, or John Schneider from Dukes of Hazzard, William Forsythe. I mean, those guys were great, but then also have, as you mentioned, Joey Lawrence, who was an icon, come in and play these roles so passionately. I mean, Jamie Kennedy, we would never expect, who's a comedian from Scream, to come in and play the role of Larry later. Was incredible. And then Stacey Dash, and one of the actors probably you didn't recognize was the guy who interviews Bernard Nathanson at the beginning, at the end. He has a famous father named Jack Lemmon. And so Chris Lemmon, who's a known actor, is also, you know, many years of experience, and just working with these guys, it was such an honor. And I think we were able to get these guys because I think they all played significant characters. I think it was exciting for Jon Voight to play Chief Justice Warren Burger, and these guys playing, you know, historical icons. And the comments we got back and the way we were able to really get such a cast like this was because they responded to the material. Not that it was pro-choice or pro-life, but I think the dialogue and the story.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. Some of the scenes that you were actually in were, I mean, pretty graphic, and just kind of exactly showing what Dr. Nathanson went through and learning different abortion techniques. I mean, it's kind of shocking, kind of, you know, what they were doing back then, and how difficult were those scenes? I mean, it was so difficult to watch them. I can't imagine like being in that scene and, you know, like having to portray and play like you're like, oh, I'm like so gung-ho on this, and wow.
Yeah, I mean, those scenes for me were challenging and nerve-wracking. But you got to put yourself in the mind of the character. You know, I think that when we try not to get graphic. I think there's two very small, quick shots in the film, but we try to do, you know, all the scenes that we had of abortions with as much taste and dignity as possible, because the film was not about glorifying abortion or glorifying the process to really show it was all about. The movie was about two things. It was about the court case and the legalities of it and how society was involved in all of that. And the main really underlining theme of the film is that it's a baby. It's a human being, and the realization that that's what that is. You know.
I think you guys did do a really good job. I mean, it's a film that could be shown in schools, because it isn't like very graphic. I think it's, you know, graphic in nature just because you know what it's about, but it's not graphic to where you're like, you need to close your eyes and you can't watch this. But it's so educational. And I think that's what is really key, is because from scene to scene, you're learning something new. Like, you're getting all these details of everything that took place with Roe v. Wade that you like, there's so much I didn't know. And I was like, oh, I had no idea that happened. And it's just like, you finally brought it all home. It's like, okay, here's everything that's been out in the world, out in the news that you've heard over these last like 3-4 decades. And this is kind of what's really going on. Like, this is all the pieces they didn't tell you that were so pivotal that we need to know as to how Roe v. Wade came to be. And you guys did such a good job with that.
That means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what do you think 2021 holds for the pro-life movement?
You know, I think we're in a great position. I mean, we do have a majority in the Supreme Court. I think where you're going to find devastating actions, and I think Biden has already signed executive orders giving money back to Planned Parenthood to fund abortions. I think you're going to have some challenges on that. But I think as it comes to state legislation, I think some of those will change. I know a lot of organizations are prepping cases to get to the Supreme Court that will tie this down. So I'm actually, you know, optimistic on a legal front, on an executive branch front. Obviously, you know, Joe Biden is very pro-abortion, which I find to be very strange. As someone who is Catholic, I'm not Catholic, but I just find it strange since it goes against everything the church stands for and believes in, that he could then fund that. And obviously it all comes down to politics. And I think the challenge is also the older generation doesn't really know. I mean, although that I've now portrayed this in a film, I think the older generation still doesn't understand, hasn't done the research. You know, they're not concerned about it as much, you know, on the pro-abortion side. And the older people, they just think, you know, it's purely a woman's right. It's a bunch of cells, and why can't a woman do whatever she wants with her own cells? Which I completely understand, because that was my belief as a child. Why can't a woman should have the right? It's part of her own body. She has the right to do whatever she wants with her own body. Why are we, anyway? But then you learn it's actually not part of her own body. And then you learn that it's not just a clump of cells. And then you learn all the things that you haven't been told or taught. And I think that that's sort of what's missing a lot when it comes down to the argument in the older generation. I think it'll change over time.
With being so active and just speaking truth in regards to the pro-life movement and being an advocate for the unborn, what do you hope like your legacy, your mission is in doing this long term? Like, what are you hoping to be?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I have both short and long-term goals. I think from a short-term perspective, I've achieved those already. I think, my sort of smaller intermediate goals would be able to change hearts and minds. I've already done that. I've had an actor on set who used to be pro-choice, who's not anymore. I've had guys who've read the script. I've had guys who've watched some test screenings for me, who have all converted, or if not converted, have taken pause. So if that saves some lives, I have done my job. It was worth it. Longer term goals is I hope that the film will have an impact when it comes to the courts and making a decision. The left is, if you watch the movie and you've seen even today, the media has a tremendous amount of control on the court system and legislatures and politicians and judges. And the Hollywood continually uses the media as a source to move their agenda. Now we can come back and fight and do the same thing with Roe and utilize Roe to help overturn Roe v. Wade. That would be my dream.
Love that. How can we find out more information about your movie? Like, where can people go and see it?
So the movie's going to be released April 2nd. It should be released on everyone's local pay-per-view. We're released on Amazon, iTunes. There are a lot of pre-screenings going on now around the country that are going to be starting next week. And so if anyone wants to see it before that, my suggestion is that they call their local church to try to get them to set up a screening. They can contact me to do that. They can call their local Right to Life group, their local Knights of Columbus, their local Crisis Pregnancy Center. And we have a lot of those type of organizations emailing us and saying, hey, we want to do a screening. We're either going to rent out a theater or with COVID, we're just going to do a virtual screening. So we're going to send out the link to all of our members. We're going to license the movie. And if people want to see before then, they should have their churches and stuff, and groups reach out to me and we can set that up for them.
Wonderful. Again, Nick, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
This has been a great interview, and I just hope that this really spreads awareness on your movie and on the pro-life movement and just the truth of Roe v. Wade. And, for all of my listeners and viewers out there, until next time, I just want to remind you to live each day with purpose, making a difference one day, one life at a time. Nick, again, thank you.
Thank you very much.